been 2 months since my last video. I made a big showing of telling everyone that I was getting back on track and, you know, not letting insecurities beat me down. And I didn't lie. All that was true. I'm back on my reading grind. I feel confident. I feel calm. I feel collected. But 3 weeks after I posted that video, about 3 weeks, my mom died. And it's been a bit of as you can imagine, ins and outs. For about a month after she died, okay, when she died and was in the hospital, I was in the middle of reading, like I said at the end of that video, The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I had to read the first 50 pages of that about 3 times before I retained the information, because I could not do it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep anything in my head, and it, for about like 3 weeks after she died, including like the week and a half she was like sick in the hospital. She had a heart attack, by the way. I just couldn't do it. It wasn't possible for my brain. Reading is healing for me, and I would like to say a few words about my mom. She was essential and like an important part of why I love reading so much. She was a really big reader when she was younger. Not so much as she got older. As she was older, and I don't know, things get harder when you're older sometimes. I don't know. So she didn't read as much, but she was like such a big supporter of me and my passion, which is one of them is reading. And sometimes I would go downstairs and she would be like watching my YouTube videos, or I'd come home from work and she'd be downstairs watching my YouTube videos, and you know, she would comment on them sometimes, which a couple of her comments are still up on some of my videos. And she would always let me talk about my books with her, whatever I was reading. She would always ask me, she would say, "Nasa, what are you reading?" And then she would let me talk about whatever stupid book I was reading. And she would let me read like the parts that I underlined that I thought were good, that no one else wants to sit and listen to, but she would do it for me. So I love her so much. But I will see her again. The Bible talks about a grand resurrection that will be taking place earthwide, and my faith is completely in that. I know I will see her again. I just have to be without her for a little while. And while I'm broken about that, I am not shattered beyond repair. And I still love books just as much as I did when she wasn't here. Before I get on to this review video, just be patient with me, okay? This was my favorite book. This is Appeals of the Earth by Ken Follett. This is my favorite book for years. I read it when I was in middle school, and I read a library copy, but I loved this book so much. And my mom, who wasn't working at the time, and we didn't have a lot of money. Anyway, she went out and she bought me my own copy of the book because I'd read a library copy. And she wrote an inscription on it for me that I would like to read to you, what lovely people, right here in the front in her beautiful handwriting. And she wrote, "Dearest Chinasa, who begged and begged to read this book, I am so happy that you discovered the joy of books and the joy of reading. You'll never be lonely with a good book in your life. Sorry. We will always share wonderful stories together. Here's to our memories of little Ava and Uncle Tom from Uncle Tom's Cabin and Tom from Pillars of the Earth. Love, your mom. So, yes. I just want to share that from my mom. Let's talk about a high wind in Jamaica. Let me compose myself and then we can talk about this. We're back in business. The question at the center of a high wind in Jamaica is, what is the line between adulthood and childhood? What is the space that is that transition? And what does it mean? I think this is a fascinating question. Seriously, I want to know people's answers to that. I think when you initially hear the question, it seems rather simple. And then you give it a minute, and then it seems like it might be a little bit more complex than just a basic answer. And then you think about it for another minute, and you feel like the answer is almost unreachable and just beyond maybe human understanding. I think parts of it still are. Let's talk about it. So this book was written in 1939 by this little guy. His name is Richard Hughes. And like I said, it's about the exploration of the space between adulthood and childhood, examining the innocent amorality as opposed to innocent morality of children who are so often credited with this kind of inherent goodness and kindness and sweetness, which I am not arguing against because I still think that is completely true. I think children do have a special kind of tender kindness of heart that is not as present in adults. Okay, that's just a fact. But Richard Hughes kind of leans into the opposite but equal truth that childhood naivete lends itself not only to good, but also sometimes just like dumb savagery. This book is reminiscent of Lord of the Flies and Peter Pan for different reasons. Lord of the Flies, obviously, because it's kind of this what's lying just beneath the surface type of thing. And then Peter Pan because J.M. Barrie really tapped into that kind of, I think, previously unspoken truth that children can be really selfish and cruel. And it's the same like state of being the child which gives them that like beauty and glow and like kind of otherworldliness that also attributes to their selfishness and their cruelty sometimes. We start off with a family who was living in Jamaica at the end of the colonial era. Emancipation just happened. They're living in Jamaica and all these kind of defunct plantations. Obviously, the infrastructure of society has collapsed now that slaves are no longer legal. And it's just this really hot kind of feeling like a ghost town of a place. And the plantations are overgrown with all of the tropical plants of Jamaica, and a lot of people have left and everything's in shambles. The language was so playful and very vivid, and I just felt it. I felt the Jamaican sun on my back. I heard the like white noise combined with just the sound of millions of insects as the sweltering heat just encompasses everything, and kind of how this made this weird kind of paradise for these small children to grow up in, which starting off in the book range from the ages of like 3, I think, to 10 or 11, 9, 10, 11. So yeah, it just kind of made for, it's just making this very hazy setting that made it almost feel like magical realism. I don't know, that might be a bit of a stretch, but I think the book primarily focuses on the second oldest child named Emily, and she is really hitting the spot where, not that you're being held accountable for your actions, because even before that, you know, you can get reprimanded as a child for doing certain things, but realizing the kind of power you hold as a human being. And so it's a very like inward realization, not outward. She's really exiting the primal vegetative state of being a baby, where you kind of just reap the kind of easy benefits of ignorance, right? Hughes actually does in this novel compare babies to animals, which I think is really interesting. I was gonna say Dostoevsky did that too, but I don't think he did. I think he might have compared their innocence in Karamazov, but I'm not 100% sure. She had not altogether ceased to be a baby, and babies of course are not human. They're animals, and they have a very ancient ramified culture, as cats have, and fishes, and even snakes, the same in kind as these, but much more complicated and vivid, since babies are, after all, one of the most developed species of the lower vertebrates. In short, babies have minds which work in terms and categories of their own, which cannot be translated into the terms and categories of the human mind. It is true that they look human, but not so human, to be fair, as many monkeys. Subconsciously, too, everyone recognizes they're animals. Why else do people always laugh when a baby does some action resembling the human, as they would at a praying mantis? If the baby was only a less developed man, there would be nothing funny in it, surely. It's a weird train of thought, and it was really kind of a great privilege to follow Richard Hughes around this novel as he circled around these ideas, because, you know, he kind of separates the spectrum of being like baby, child, adult, and our main character Emily is kind of in a constant flux, transitional period between like baby, childhood, kind of. There's honestly a really fascinating chapter in the book where Emily basically comes to sentience, and Richard Hughes narrates this 9-year-old girl realizing that she is a being, and it literally almost puts her in real mental shock, that she exists not just as herself, as Emily just trolloping through the world, but she exists as Emily, as a person in relation to other people whom she can consciously affect. And this realization like genuinely messes with her mind, and I think it was really cool how he kind of gave us this microscopic lens of this kind of realization. It's a moment that is so blurred, I think, in everybody's lives, that it was cool to get to see Hughes like mapping out this girl's childhood and then like putting a stop on time and pinpointing the very second where Emily, our MC, comes to this sentience and like narrates it for like a couple of pages of like what her thoughts are. But it's almost like she enters another dimension of consciousness, which really, that's what you're doing when you know, stop being somebody who's so you know, she just spent, you know, the previous decade of her life so unaware of the type of power she held as a human being. And when she comes to it, it kind of messes her up, because she simultaneously realizes how devastating that power almost always is. So the novel is circling around the genesis of this transformation, and kind of like the constant fluctuation she's going as she like solidifies into the next form of her life. But it is different from Peter Pan in the way that J.M. Barrie really was a magic worker in how he made that story like two-tiered. You can read it as a child for an adventure and then also as an adult, and it means something completely different, or maybe somewhere in between. This book definitely does not have that duality. It is a book about children, very clearly for adults. The reason why this book's affecting me so much is because I think it pointing in some direction of some universal truth, which I don't think I've pinpointed quite yet, but it's kind of like the two sides of what's good and bad about being grown up, because in the same space that Emily, our MC, is entering into, where she's devastated, and at one point she calls herself, she thinks, like the most evil person in the world, or the most evil person to have ever been born. The space that she's entering and the kind of magnitude of the power that she's realizing that she has is the same space where what terrifies her is the fact that she can so consciously hurt other people. But that's the same space where you can consciously choose to be kind and like wholeheartedly choose to love people. And it's kind of magical, right? It's a two-edged sword. It's still hard to say what the exact line is that this book explores, which is the line where, you know, the difference between a child and an adult. And it's not just knowledge, right? It's the knowledge of knowledge. It's like a self-awareness that you begin to crave when you get to that certain age, but also oppositely, when you're feeling nostalgic, that same self-awareness is what you wish you could be rid of, right? Because when you think back on being a childhood, I think something about it that is so delicious is the fact that you didn't really know all that much, that you weren't aware of that much. And there's like truly truth in the saying, ignorance is bliss. There is a sort of bliss in childhood, which you don't really ever really get to attain fully as an adult. You can maybe understand it intellectually, but not get it again, that people look back on and they want. It's the feeling of just taking everything at face value. I think there's also like a lack of comparison that comes in that, because you're experiencing everything for the first time. You know, if your mom makes you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and, you know, you're on the back porch or in the backyard with your siblings or a friend in the middle of summer, it very well could be the greatest moment you've ever experienced, genuinely, in a way that you don't have to twist it or see the beauty in it, even though it might not be all that good, which I think, you know, when you're an adult, you can agree to have a peanut butter jelly sandwich in your backyard with a friend, but it's never gonna hold the same weight. Or maybe it can hold the same weight, but it'll just be different. Hughes does a really good job of illustrating that in the story when he, Thornton children go through a hurricane. It's at the beginning of the book. And the parents are really kind of obsessed with the traumatizing effects that this hurricane might have had on them. The kind of, you know, it was really dramatic, you know, people died. They're basically, all of their house was completely decimated. But the kids kind of didn't understand the weight of the situation. They accepted the change in their lives practically without noticing it. It is a fact that it takes experience before one can realize what a catastrophe is and what it is not. And children have little faculty of distinguishing between disaster and the ordinary course of their lives. If Emily had known that this was a hurricane, she doubtless would have been far more impressed, for the word was full of romantic terrors. But it had never entered her head. A thunderstorm, however severe, is after all a commonplace affair. It is mere fact that it had done incalculable damage, while the earthquake had done none at all, that gave it no right whatever to rival the latter in the hierarchy of cataclysms. Children have this like unknowing resilience in them, it's really something only a child can possess. And while adult can possess the same level of resilience, it comes with a price, because that resilience is so deliberate and it's strenuous a lot of the times. While a child can just kind of flow, be in this like flow state of not being able, I think it goes back to like having the comparisons or the understandings, or maybe just the depth of thought that it can give to be in a catastrophe. And that's why these bigger things have so much more weight when you're older. I'm not saying that a kid can't experience a catastrophe in their own way, but I don't know. It's this unknowing resilience that really only belongs to children. It's just, this was really a fascinating read. It really kind of took me by surprise. I wasn't really expecting it to like it that much. The ending is a little haunting, as all good novels endings are, and I just felt like I wanted to talk about that. And I want to, like I said, hear y'all's opinions about the line between adulthood and childhood, and where you think it is, and the differences between children and adults, and the transition period, and the gaining of sentience, and this unknown universal truth that it's all pointing to, that is the heart of man. Both beautiful and savage at the same time. Anyways, guys, A High Wind in Jamaica by Richard Hughes. I really enjoyed this book. I will be looking for more Hughes in the future. I will be rereading passages of this. I will be thinking about this for the next week, and probably more time to come. And I want to know what you guys' opinions are. As always, happy reading, losers.